Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Garland Nixon. He's a radio talk show host, a political analyst, and he's also the host of the Garland Nixon Show on YouTube. Welcome back, Garland. I know it's been a bit.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Always a pleasure. I love your show. I watch it all the time.
Oh, thanks so much. I know I saw you briefly at the Julian Assange rally in DC back in October. There were so many people I saw there that I was like, oh, I want to go talk to this person, that person. But I feel like every time I started to walk, I got pulled in a different direction. But I know you're going to be at the rally in DC February 19th. So I do want to talk a little bit about that later on as well. All right. So, Garland, I want to get your opinion about this incident that happened with Tyre Nichols. I'm sure you've heard about this multiple times by now, but you were a former police officer. And there's one clip here I want to show you. It's from a TikTok vid, and I want to get your take on how the police chief actually handled the reporting of this situation.
Hey, good morning, and what a difference a day makes. Just 24 hours ago, we were wondering if more than 5 officers were involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. And today we find out, it's 7. 7 officers were involved in the beating of Tyre Nichols, and all of them have been relieved of duty in some way, shape, form, or fashion. According to a statement from the Memphis Police Department, on January 8th, just one day after Tyre Nichols died, 7 officers were relieved of duty. That means Chief Davis lied when she stood in front of the world and told us that 5 officers were involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols, when she knew good and well 2 more officers were involved, but for some reason she decided to hide their identities. And like my mom always say, what's done in the dark always comes to the light. And we found out that Officer Preston Hemphill was the 6th officer who was involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. Now, Preston here was one of the first officers involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. Not only did he say, "I hope they stomp him out," but he also tried to tase him on multiple occasions.
Okay, Garland, that piece right there about Chief Davis not being honest about the number of police officers that were involved in this incident, and also for some reason, one of these officers was not mentioned. His face was not in the media. I want to get your take on that. I know you were a former police officer. How do you feel about the way that this was handled?
A couple of things. Well, keep in mind, I was a police official. I was very high ranking. And there were times when, say, the police chief and the deputy chief may be out of state at a conference or something, where I would literally run the department. You know, I would literally be the highest ranking person. So had something that happened at that time, I would have been the responsible authority in this instance, in this type of instance. Okay, a couple of things. You know, just from a perspective of my experience, we don't know that the police chief lied. Keep in mind something. You're the police chief. So underneath is the deputy chief. Underneath is the who's in charge of this place, and then investigations and support services. So how many levels there were down between the police chief and the actual people who were looking into it, we don't know. So we don't know how much information the police chief actually had. Yes, you know, I know people are going to make the assumption. The assumption is the police chief knew everything, therefore she had to be hiding something. Having been in that position before, I can tell you it is likely that there were bits and pieces of information coming to the police chief. I'm not saying this to protect her. I'm not saying anything. It is what it is. But I'm just saying my experience is it is possible that the police chief had information and hid it. It is just as possible, from my experience, I'd say maybe even likely, that the police chief was getting this amount of information and that amount of information. You don't know that there weren't people that were like intentionally, look, we're going to tell her 5. Right now, let's go with 5. Okay, we're telling her 5. And she went out and said 5. And then to tape, and they're like, okay, chief, we've looked at the tape, and we got 2 more people we're going to charge, and investigations and looking into it, and we got 2 more people. You know what I mean? So to make the assumption that the police chief acted, you know, maliciously and hid information, it's possibly true. My experiences says I can't guarantee you how much information she had to share. I mean, that's just the truth to the fact of the matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why do you think the other police officer, the white police officer, why do you think his face and his name is not being splattered all over mainstream media like the other officers? Because he almost kind of went under the radar for a while.
Well, that's different. There's two issues here. So there's the issue of what happened inside of the police department, and then there is the reaction of the mainstream media, which now we're talking about the issues of the cultural issues in the United States of, the black person gets their name flashed all over the news, and the white guy maybe not, maybe not so much. So I think the issue of the media, which I'm also in the media, it has been my experience that, um, here's what I think. There is a certain amount of protectionism in America, right? There's a certain amount of white America wants to do everything they can to try to tamp down the idea that racism still exists. And I think it's reflexive. Is it malicious? Is it, okay, there's a picture of a white guy, we got to hide that? Or is it reflexively, man, we don't want white people to look bad. So if there's, some way that we can kind of frame this a little bit, and that doesn't mean that people are thinking about doing that. That is reflexive action in white America, kind of like, well, if there's still a lot of racism in America, or if these things are racism, by kind of proxy, it makes me as a white person look bad. So I kind of reflexively try to tamp that down as much as possible. And those things are not necessarily conscious, but they're in the DNA of America.
What do you think do you think this is going to be the wake up call for people? Like, there's other things that are being alleged as well. I don't have evidence on it, but it's also being alleged that Tyre dated one of the police officers, like ex-girlfriend or something like that. Still haven't seen like proof of that. Do you feel that this attack was personal? Watching the video, is just the way they went after him, saying, get on the ground, when he was already on the ground. And they were tasing him when he was on the ground, which I didn't understand that either. And then, so I believe the reason why he got up to run away is because he was being tased and he was already on the ground. And then to follow him and then to beat him up. Do you feel like this was personal?
No, I don't feel like it was personal. I think it's a mistake to think it's personal, because to argue that it's personal takes away from the reality that it ain't got to be personal for a black person to get beat up. I remember when I was a cadet one time, and I was in this area in Baltimore. It was called the Block, and the Block was where all the strip joints were. And what would happen is, I'll tell this story. What would happen is, like, young people, I was maybe 19 or 20. We'd go to the area where the bars were and hang out and drink, and, whatever, you're 19 or 20, you're trying to meet the girls, that kind of stuff that you do when you're 19 or 20, and the area where all the bars are. After the bars closed down at 2, we would go there because they had some places to eat, and you'd stand in there and you'd drink you couldn't get alcohol anymore. You'd get something to eat, and you look out the window, and it was the Block. It was the strip joint area. So there was all kind of craziness going outside. So you'd watch that and, aha, did you see that? Or whatever. Okay. And one day I'm out there, and I saw a fight. I saw 2 policemen wrestling with a guy, and he was really big, and he beat them both up pretty easily. The police department, Central District in Baltimore, was a block away. I saw a sea of police officers come out and mercilessly beat, I saw this with my own eyes, mercilessly beat every person on the street that they saw for any reason. Now, the perpetrator was gone. I saw one guy, he had, like, how the kind of crutches that a person has when they both arms, and it has like little 4 feet at the bottom, and the little thing goes around there. So this guy had these. He was clearly handicapped in some way, right? He's struggling along to go between 2 cars. The cops grab him, threw him on a car, beat him mercilessly with a stick, dragged him away. Anybody they saw, it was like a feeding frenzy. So here's my point. That wasn't personal. If you look at the video, you'd say, oh my God, they must have hated this guy. They beat everybody they saw. My point being, you're mistaken if you think that it has to be something personal for the cops to beat somebody mercilessly. I put it like this. I know people who raise dogs, and dogs have certain instincts. And one of certain types of pack dogs, if one dog starts attacking, the other ones will just do it out of instinct. Well, they see a dog attacking another dog, and there's 4 dogs in his pack. The other 3 will they don't even have to know what's going on. They will instinctively attack whatever the target the other one is. I kind of think it's like that. I think it's like a pack of dogs. Once one cop starts beating someone, the other cops are like, oh, okay, hey, it's time to beat somebody. This guy's doing it. Let's all join in. That's what I think it is. So I don't think it's personal. They don't. You're mistaken if you think it's got to be about somebody's girlfriend. Sorry, no. They will beat an innocent person just because they're like a pack of dogs.
Yeah, because for me, I was like, JB and I were talking about this earlier, and I was like, all this over a woman? Like, there's other females. It doesn't need to be this way. Like, it was a bit ridiculous to me. Do you think that anything is going to change, like in policing? I know we've seen these videos multiple times. I get tired of playing these videos, to be honest with you. But do you think this one could be the tipping point to get some type of real police reform?
No. I think that maybe some Congress members will put on a kente cloth and kneel or something like that. We'll get their thoughts and prayers for the family. But no, it's not going to. No, not in I've seen this too many times. How many times do we have to ask this question? Well, George Floyd, is this going to be the one? No, This ain't going to be the one. There ain't one that's going to happen because of the way because of the way the discussion is posed, right? The system has even brainwashed Black people into looking at it wrong. Here's what I mean. When an institution has some kind of a problem in the institution never wants to say there's an institutional or systemic problem. The institution wants to say, so somebody in this institution beats a Black person, right? Is there an institutional problem? Nope. That was an individual officer who made a bad decision, or he was a bad apple. The bad apple. He was a bad cop. It's silly. It's like a Marvel mystery, like a Marvel movie. You've got the evil villain and the good guys, and we can divide cops into evil villains and good guys. But that would imply that if you get rid of the individual evil villains, that you'll only have good guys left. But wait a minute. 20 years ago, we had evil villains and good guys. They've all retired. We still have the same dynamic. What that means is it ain't bad cops and good cops. It ain't bad apples. It isn't individual cops making a bad decision. It is a systemic problem. It is the culture of racism in America expressing itself through law enforcement. If I may take a moment to give you another story, something that I saw. To really make it clear. Okay, I was a young man, doing what young men do. I made enough money. I decided to buy me a shiny Beamer, and it was a pretty one, right? I got my Beamer. Man, it's shining. I go up to the local convenience store, and I had a phone installed, because that's what you did back then. That was cool to have a phone installed. And they screwed something up with the phone. The car, it stopped running. Well, for starters, I go into the 7-Eleven that I go in every day in my patrol car in law enforcement. I talk to the guy in there. He's laughing. I said, "What are you laughing at?" He says, "Well," he said, there was just a bunch of white people in there. This guy was a Muslim, and he said it just like this. "There was a bunch of white people in there." I said, "Yeah." And they looked at you pull up in that BMW, and they said, "Yeah, I know how he got that money. He's a drug dealer." And he said, "No, he's not. He's a cop. I know him. He comes in every day." And they all just kind of got quiet and left. Here's my point. They weren't police officers, were they? They were just everyday Americans. So if any of them decided, I think I will join the police force, when they saw a young Black man in a shiny BMW, you got to pull him over because he's probably a drug dealer. In other words, the mentality that every young Black man in a shiny BMW is a drug dealer is not alone in law enforcement. It is part of how all these white people that saw Garland Nixon, and maybe even some of the Black folks that saw Garland Nixon pull up in front of a convenience store in a BMW, a bunch of people looked out and said, "There's a drug dealer." Now, the difference is a cop pulls up and says, "There's a drug dealer." They say, "I got to pull him over." And Garland Nixon ends up shot or beaten mercilessly because the police officer has the authority and ability to do things that these other people can't do. But he doesn't see me any differently. So that's why my point is, this is an expression of American culture that everybody out there says, there's a young Black man in a new BMW and it's shiny, and he's got on I had a Raiders hat, black hat that said Los Angeles Raiders. How about that? Drug dealer, no matter who it was. But because it was a police officer, the end ends up differently. So we have to understand that this is an expression of American culture coming out in law enforcement because they have the authority to do things that other people can't. That means also that because that's the government, it is the responsibility of the government to A, recognize that problem, and B, mitigate that problem. But we have to communicate to them that it's not an individual bad officer or a bad apple, because they'll be happy to say, yes, that's what it was. We'll just fire. We'll do whatever to this guy. And then the problem solved. We got the bad apple out of the basket. And then, of course, we deal with the same thing over and over. And we're asking ourselves next week, is this going to be the one?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally hear you. So you've been killing it lately, like on your show. I know you've talked a lot about Russia and Ukraine. You've also had to deal with issues of censorship. So I want to ask you about censorship first. I know it was a while back you were censored on Twitter, but then you came back. And then also it seems like Facebook tried to censor you too. Facebook's weird. Like I don't stream, like when I stream, I don't stream to Facebook because it just never works out well for me. In the past, I noticed that. But you also got censored on Facebook. But one of the things you pointed out in your video was that there was another account that shared the same information that you shared. It was like an Amazon link to a book or something like that. But that wasn't censored. So when it comes to censorship, do you think they go after particular accounts or they go after certain subjects per se?
Both. One thing we saw, the Twitter files were very revealing, revealing, because I think what one of the things that we learned from the Twitter files was that the FBI was meeting with various social media outlets. So anything that we learned about the Twitter files, we know what's going on with Facebook. We also know that Facebook has been working with the Atlantic Council, NATO's, and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and all of that. Their think tank. So Facebook has NATO's think tank in there telling us what we should and shouldn't see. So what we know is all of the worst possible things that we learned about that was going on in Twitter was going on in Facebook. And we also saw, here's what's the interesting thing. People want to always say the algorithm got me. But what we saw in the Twitter files were there were instances where there were accounts that didn't have that many people. And someone in power would see it and go, oh my God, did you see what they tweeted? We've got to stop them. And they got like 20 followers. Well, if they're going to go after people that have 20 followers, you know, a person like me who's on various outlets all over the country, they're going to go after me. So basically, I'll make it quick. What happened was Zelensky was on Man of the Year, Time Magazine Man of the Year. And I looked and somebody had that up there and saying this is terrible and something about Nazis in Ukraine, stuff like that. So someone up there had put a link to 1938 Hitler Time Magazine Man of the Year.
Yep.
I went up and found that link and I put the link in. Seconds after I put the link in, I put the link up, it popped up. Oh, you have violated our whatever, and you can't stream for 89 days. You're 30 days, you're locked out of your account. You can't post all these extreme things, right? So that's when I did the video. And when I showed on the video, I said, now let me show you something. The link that I put up that I was suspended for is still up there, but somebody else did it. So it wasn't about the link. It was about who put the link. So I put this up, right? Here's what's interesting. What I showed is, and look at what we were responding to. The guy saying all this stuff about Ukraine Nazis, he's still up. The other person that put the same link is up. I'm down, right? The next day, they suspended everybody on Facebook who put that link up, and they suspended the guy so clearly they responded. And I've seen that happen before where Facebook actually responded to YouTube videos, and YouTube has done the same. I've seen that. They responded to my video one time. So I've seen that happen before. They respond to individual things with individual people. People err if they think it's always about an algorithm. We learned from the Twitter files that it's not. Sometimes, yeah, but more often than not, especially if you're a bigger name person, they're gunning for you.
Do you feel like you have to, like when you do your radio show, do you feel like you have to deal with as much censorship as you do with like YouTube and Twitter?
No. No. The only censorship I deal with on my radio show, and it's not really censorship at all. So one of the shows that I have in Los Angeles is KPFK. It's Pacifica. And so, you know, if anybody knows me, I say what I'm thinking, good, bad, or indifferent, like it or not, I don't care, right? So there's a guy on there named Brad Friedman. I'll tell you his name. He hates my guts. And like I do my show and he goes on and says like Garland's a Russian bot and this Ukraine stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, why don't Brad can come on the show anytime, and he won't come on the show. So the only, you know, this guy on KPFK hates my guts and he always, you know, gives me the Russian bot treatment because of my position on Ukraine. But I will say this, I have a show on Pacifica and they don't say a word in Los Angeles. I have a show on Pacifica in Washington, D.C. They never say a word. I say what I want. I do whatever I want. So most of the time, I don't, other than, you know, the online stuff, YouTube, Twitter, stuff like that, I don't face anything in the real world.
That's interesting because some people would think that radio may be more strict, but I think things have changed. Like there's another one called a Sputnik. I listen to them a lot.
I do Radio Sputnik show. Yeah.
Yep. Jamal Thomas and all of them. Like same thing. Like some of the things that they talk about on there, like I would get flagged if I talked about it like on YouTube or even honestly, even on Twitter, depending on how many people report you and things like that. But that's another thing that happens too, that I think some people in the audience may not realize. A lot of times these people are mass reported. Like I know that happened to Jackson Hinkle. That's what happened with his YouTube channel. So there are like these groups on Discord that actually exist just to try to take people down. It's ridiculous. People have no life, Garland. People have no life.
Well, and you'd probably be surprised to find how many of them that the root cause is somewhere in Langley, Virginia, or the Pentagon. You know what I mean? A lot of these, it ain't that they don't have a life. Remember, a while back, there was an article that came up that showed that the Pentagon has like, they called it like their invisible online army of 60,000 people. So that we know of, just that we know of, the Pentagon has 60,000 paid people online using alias names that are out there doing stuff. 60,000. Think how much damage they can do. You don't think they're going after people like us who are taking positions that are not popular with the deep state? You would be in error if you think that.
How long do you think this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is going to last? And I ask that because it does seem like things are escalating. Germany announced recently that they're sending in Leopard tanks. This, of course, was after Joe Biden said that we would be sending in tanks from the U.S. So it just seems like it's escalating instead of de-escalating. And the big fear I think a lot of us have is the fact that, listen, Putin's not playing around. Like he says he has nuclear weapons. So how long do you think this conflict is going to continue? Do you think this may end up being like another Afghanistan? Because that's something else that I fear.
Okay, a couple of things going on here. Number one, as an example, the problem for, I don't even say NATO because there's no, it's the United States. NATO is nothing but an organization, an umbrella organization that the United States uses to bring all of its vassals in Europe together so it can put them all under one roof, so it can take have control of their foreign policy. So there is no NATO as per se. It's the United States and a bunch of puppets doing what they're told, right? And so a couple of things, that most of their stuff is PR, number one. Okay, Germany says we'll send tanks in maybe 3 months or 4 months. We're not sure. The U.S. says we'll send tanks. But now when you look into it, the U.S. says now the tanks aren't built yet. We can't send them the tanks. So the example, the other day, the U.S. said we're going to send $2 billion worth of stuff, right? Just 3 or 4 days ago. And when you read into the article, of it, $1.7 billion is to order stuff from the defense contractors to be built at a later time, understanding that there are other countries who have orders ahead of that. So after they get finished building the stuff for Pakistan and Egypt and Poland or whatever, then when there'll be no Ukraine left, of course, at that point, then then that's when they'll build the stuff for Ukraine. In other words, most of the stuff, the PR stuff that they're saying, if you read, you don't even have to search. Read the entire article from top to bottom. People look at the headlines. U.S. sending 30 tanks, but if you read the entire article, it's yeah, we're ordering them from the General Dynamics, and they said it could be a year. The Washington Post had an article that literally said the U.S. basically did that because Germany said we won't send tanks unless you send them. So we said that, and in the Washington Post it said it could be months, could be years, maybe never. In other words, yeah, we just did that to get Germany. So you know what Germany's doing? Yeah, same with us, maybe never. What are they going to send their tanks? They started off, Ukraine had 2,000 tanks. Now they got pretty much none because they all got blown up. Are another 30 or 40 tanks 3 to 6 months to a year from now going to make a difference? Certainly not. So you've got a PR war going on to fool the American people and fool the European people to think that we're providing all of this hardware and it's going to make a difference and Ukraine is going to stand up and fight back. In reality, the Ukrainians are getting slaughtered and the major towns in Ukraine are falling, and it's just a matter of time. The only thing about it is the Russians are kind of incremental, acting slow. And if you look at the history of Russian warfare, what they did in World War II, they sit back, they throw artillery at you until you can't move. And once there's nothing around but scraggly pieces of trees and boulders, they move on up and then they throw artillery at you until, you know what I mean? So they're just very slow and incremental. And that's what's going on. And the rest, meanwhile, they're doing that. And the West is just throwing PR and winning the Twitter war. And I keep saying, you know, if there's a war and one side's trying to win the Twitter war and the other side's using artillery's going to win that battle every single time. And it's how long can they keep people believing that this is a fight and the valiant Ukrainians are standing up against the Russians? They're going to take Crimea next. They're going to take back the Donbass. Meanwhile, they're just getting slaughtered. It's really a crime against humanity that the United States is just throwing the Ukrainians in front of artillery. And by a lot of estimations, they're losing like 200 people a day in just one town.
Yeah, it's really bad. And I also wonder too, I feel like they're trying to drag this war out. I'm wondering, how long do you think this is going to continue before somebody, maybe on the Democratic Party side in Congress, stands up and say, look, enough is enough. We can't send the money anymore.
It's already started. It's already started because there was a couple of articles that I was reviewing. There was an article in Politico. So what we see is the Rand Corporation, which is funded by the Pentagon, wrote an article recently that said it's not good for the U.S. if this war goes on. So now we've got some neocons starting to say, you know, maybe this thing should end by summer. Here's the problem. Now, let me say this. Meanwhile, what did the Russians say? You read the TASS and you read the various Russian, we're told don't read RT or TASS or any of the things the Russians write. And I'm like, why wouldn't you read that? Because you want to know what they're thinking, right? Here's what they said. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, said within the last couple of days. They're talking about time. We have an objective. It has nothing to do with time. We will complete our objective. If it's done in a day, it's done in a day. If it takes 1,000 years, it takes 1,000 years. I'm adding that for effect. But you get my point. Their position is we have something we are going to do. Our objectives are clear, and we are not putting a timestamp on it. That's for you guys to do. So the Russians aren't worried about how long it takes. They have an objective. That's what they're. Think about this. They've been in Syria since what, 2014? You know what I mean? How long? I mean, you look at some of the various, what was it, Georgia, 8, 9 years. I mean, for them, the Russians, I would argue, are slow to go to war. But when they go to war, they ain't in no rush. So if it takes a year, if it takes 5 years, Russia don't care. They have decided what they're going to do. They have changed their industry. They now have their industrial military capacity working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They're building shells, they're building tanks, they're building everything. They have moved their economy to a semi-war footing so that if they need to continue this for the next 10 years, they have adjusted their economy, they have adjusted their industrial output so they can do it. They are prepared for however long they need to do it. We ain't. Because we're running out of stuff to give Ukraine now. And our people are starting to say, perhaps we should start looking at a way out. And the Russians are like, that's up to you. because we're going to finish this thing one way or the other. If you come to us and say you want a deal, we'll listen, but we don't have to have a deal because we have an objective and we're moving towards it. That's what the Russians were saying.
Interesting. One thing I want to mention as well, you made a video, and I thought this was really good because people need to see how the money is being spent or where the money could go. Oh, sorry, Eric. I think I clicked on the wrong thing. I'm trying to go back to the other tab screen. Yeah, thanks so much. You made this video. I think Eric's going to pull it up for me. It's the Twitter one. I saw it on Twitter. There we go. You made this video. We were talking about like the billions of dollars that has gone to Ukraine. And there was something that you mentioned here, and I think more people need to see this because this is just the reality of what we are facing here in the United States. So I just want to play this clip because I thought this was really spot on.
This is the U.S. empire. Look at that. Shanty towns. People live in these things. They find pieces of cardboard. Look at that, an old boat. Look at the streets. This is the U.S. empire. This is the country. And this is the United States. These people live in this right now. Look at this. This is the country that we live in. This is the country that just is in the process of spending $858 billion on the military-industrial complex right now. Look at the streets. The stores are closed everywhere, just collapsed. Look on both sides of the streets. Businesses closed. One of the things that exacerbated this was the lockdowns. People couldn't work. They couldn't make a living. So the last 3 years has took a dramatic turn. This is the United States. What the hell are we doing? Sending all of this money to Ukraine. That's it. That's Oakland, California. Shacks, shanty towns, garbage, poverty. Look at that. That's America. That's what we got now. People have nothing. Is that the great shining country on the hill? Old RVs that they built in there. People are living. Cars. People have cars. People drive over there because they have jobs, but they don't have a house. Look at this place. This is the United States. This is what we're looking at now. I think you've seen enough. You looked at those pictures. Is that a country that is going to collapse? Is that a country that may be collapsing? Or is that a country that has collapsed? It's Ukraine. It's a military outpost. That's what it is. Cold, hard reality. It's a military outpost. People can say it has about religion or ethnicity or this group, but we're giving billions to that military outpost while the country looks like this.
That's the important piece, and we'll talk about Rage Against the War Machine in just a second, but that's the important piece I think a lot of people need to really see is that the homelessness issue in this country, I've watched this increase year after year after year. Everybody has tent cities now, Garland. This used to be like a San Francisco thing, an LA thing, but they're in Austin, Texas now, which is one of the more cheaper places to live. They're in Dallas, Texas. They're in Raleigh, North Carolina. My dad was telling me there's more homeless people in Columbia, South Carolina now. We have them here in Boston. Like, how long does this continue before the bubble really bursts? Because I feel like we're at that point where people are reaching their breaking point. Inflation is really high. But it's not just us. I talk to people in the UK. They're telling me their inflation is like 10.4%. This is ridiculous. So what do you think it's going to take for the American people to get thousands of people out in the streets the way that France has been doing recently to push back against this predatory system in this country?
You know, I wish I had the answer to that, because one of the things that you saw that video, right? And this is what America looks like now. I mean, just shanty towns, a third world country. And meanwhile, if you look on TV, there are a bunch of Congress members, and what are they saying? We have to push back against the Republicans because we lost our committee seats.
Yep.
And I'm like, your committee seats? People can't afford to eat. They're living in shanty towns. And these people are so detached from the electorate. You know, AOC, not just the ones that are supposed, oh, I'm there for the people. I'm a democratic socialist. And then there's Adam Schiff. Well, I expect him. He's a warmongering neocon. But all of them, they're living in this little bubble where the biggest problem they have as they drive around in their Teslas and they have unlimited money coming in for $20,000 an hour speeches and things like that. Their biggest problem is they lost their committee seat. Well, you know what? If you're sitting on a committee and that's the results, that you're losing a committee, and those people, if there's a heavy rain, the top falls in on their house and they all get wet because they're living on cardboard. And so the reality, here's what I'm getting at. The people, the ruling elite in this country, are completely detached and decoupled from the constituency, from the voters. And in England right now, millions of people in the street. The fact of the matter is this: the people in charge don't really care. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, the people are in the street. Oh man, we better go get some tea. And what do you want to do after that? I said, we hang out and have a drink and dance or something, right? They don't care. So, you know, I think the collapse continues. I think unless people are willing to do something different voting, as long as people are just like every 4 years, you know, the two parties can scare them of each other. Oh my God, we got to do something. The Republicans are going to get us. Oh no, we got to do something. The Democrats, the woke people are going to do something. And as long as they're able to scare us out of our wits using some cultural issue, we ain't going to do nothing. Every 4 years, we're going to vote for the same schmucks, and we're going to keep getting there. They're going to whine about losing their committee seats, and then they're going to send $120 billion to their donors, and we're going to get nothing. So the collapse is in the process. And if they don't care now, ain't nothing going to wake them up. The question is not what is going to happen to wake up the ruling elite class. They're already awake. The question is, are we going to do something differently than what we're doing now as an electorate, other than just fight amongst each other and blame each other for our woes?
Very well said. Very well said. Well, some people are trying to find a way to fight back, and you're one of them. There is a rally that is going to be happening in DC. Now, this is February 19th, Rage Against the War Machine. It's an anti-war rally, and this is actually being hosted by a number of organizations. This is President's Day weekend. So for those of you that have President's Day off, if you're in the DC area, definitely check this out. But Garland, you are going to be one of the speakers. And I do want to show this. I noticed the list has increased since I talked about this last time. Yeah. So it's Jimmy Dore, Ann Wright, Ron Paul. That's new.
That is new.
He's going down here. Scott Horton.
Dennis
Kucinich.
I used to see him at Fox all the time. You know, I used to be at Fox News. I used to see him all the time there.
Wow.
Had lunch with him and his wife one time at on Capitol Hill.
This is so different. Okay, so Andrew
Napolitano.
Oh, Chris Hedges is
now.
People are seeing my real reaction because last time it wasn't this many people. David Swanson, Daniel McAdams, of course, there's Garland, Max Blumenthal, and Anya are going to be speakers as well. Supreme, for those who don't know, Supreme is a Wu-Tang Clan affiliate producer. I think he's one of the Wu-Tang Clan's sons. I think so.
Wow. Cash rules everything around me.
I know, right? Tara Reid, Diane Sayre's going to be there. Scott Ritter, Kim Iverson, Jackson Hinkle.
Oh, Jackson Hinkle's done jumped in, huh? What do you know?
I'm telling you, this list keeps growing. Craig, who you guys know is Pasta from Convo Couch, Wyatt Reed. And I think that's all. Those are all the ones right now.
So far.
This is going to be awesome. So I'll be there. I'm going to live stream this event. I think this is probably going to be one of the bigger rallies that I've gone to politically anyway. Like the Assange rally, they said that was the biggest turnout that they had in DC, but that was a good turnout too. But I think based on what I've been hearing from people, I think this is going to be one of the bigger ones. So, but Garland, why did you decide to join on?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting, and let me add this: there's things going on inside right now, and there's somebody who, and let me just say this: somebody who I think the world of, right? Think the world of, dropped out today and said, no, there are people there who I disagree with, right? And so therefore, I'm not going to be able to speak. And my reaction was, number one, I've never been to an event yet in my life where there wasn't people there that I disagreed with on something. Never. You know, but the bottom line is this: my priority, human extinction through nuclear holocaust is kind of at the top of my priority list. So we may have disagreements in other areas, but we can't have disagreements if we're all dead. It's kind of like the Matrix, where the guy is talking to Neo, and he says he can't be the one if he's dead. We can't fight for anything else if war takes us apart. And not only that, let's just say we don't get to that level. It's taken our country apart. We'll all be living in these stinking shacks and things of that nature. So what we have to do is prioritize. I think it is critical, since we can't build a anti-war movement with just the left. So many people that were once on the left, now they've defined the left. So many people that once were supposedly on the left are now, they're diehard Democrats and warmongers cheering for war. We got to find out, any port in a storm, as they say in the maritime world. We got to find anybody we can. We got to build an anti-war coalition with people who prioritize pushing back against this warmongering machine that we find ourselves in. And if we have some disagreements, understand this. You and I guarantee you have disagreements. We could search around and find some things that we totally disagree with. That's fine. We're human beings. I will think of something, and 6 months later, I'll look back and say, man, I sure was wrong on that one. So I think it's good, and I think it's powerful to start to bring people together based on a set of priorities. Also, I think people should look at the demands. The demands are awesome. Go to that, because one of the demands is free Julian Assange. That's right in there. People recognizing the importance of the First Amendment and the media. So the demands are very important. I mean, if you look over to those demands, they are fantastic. Stop the war inflation, right? I mean, that's for the average working class, working poor, or poor person out there, right? Look at that. Nuclear de-escalation, disband NATO. What is NATO for? It is now they're saying NATO wants to go after China. North Atlantic? But it's after China? That ain't nowhere near the North Atlantic. So there are things, slash the Pentagon budget. How are we going to do anything about homelessness without addressing the Pentagon budget? So the things that everyone there has agreed on, you can argue these are for the betterment of us all.
That's right. I get tired of it too, Garland. People saying, well, I don't want to be a part of this event because someone that I don't like is going to be there. And I'm just like, no one is asking you to be best friends with these people. Like, just like,
you want a friend, get a dog.
Just find something that you agree with. Again, free Julian Assange. Like, I think all of us can at least agree on that one. But I mean, like, there's too many purity tests, and it's gotten to the point where, like, honestly, for me, it's just like, this is why things don't get done on the left. Because it's just, I can't be with that person, or I don't want to be seen with this person, or they said this like a year ago, so I don't want to be at the same event. There's going to be a lot of people here. So I don't see the right doing this, Garland. I don't see them having these kind of like purity tests, and they seem to be organizing on the ground. They're getting school board positions. And meanwhile, the left is just fractured.
One of the things that I think is an important discussion now, and that is, who the heck is the left? You know what I mean? The definition of the left. I will posit this argument. The United States, in the US, politics has redefined the left, right? Traditionally, what was the left? It was in the French Parliament. It was a literal physical metaphor. If you sat on the left side in the French Parliament, the people who literally sat on the left side of the room were the people who were opposed to the monarchy, were opposed to the status quo, wanted change, wanted to look out for the little guy. The people who literally sat on the right side, right, were the people who were for the monarchy, the nobility, the class system, the status quo. That was left and right. Now in America, traditionally, let's say in America and Europe, what has left been over the last 100 years, right? The left was viewing politics through economic class, right? We got to look at it through my politics or whatnot. Am I black or white, green, gray, or grizzly? It's, am I working class, working poor, and poor? We have to, the left, we got to look out for the working class, the working poor, and poor. It has been redefined now. You'll hear people say, yeah, the left with all the woke or trans or whatever. Well, that ain't traditional left. Traditional left is, I'm not saying it's for or against it. I'm simply saying that I'm for or against it. Yeah, how can you be for or against it? It is what it is. I'm saying to use cultural issues to define politics as left or right, as opposed to economic class, redefines it. So now you got Joe Biden, who is opposed to labor unions, that's traditional left, is in favor of concentrated corporate power, that's the opposite. Traditional left opposes and is very apprehensive about, right? Is pro-war. I mean, all of the things that are traditional left, Joe Biden is in absolute opposition to him. He is for the status quo and the new nobility. He would be sitting on the right side of the room. But now people say he's the left. Why? Because of cultural issues. So now in America, when we say left, we mean cultural issues. We don't no longer mean economic class. We have to get that definition out and say, what the hell are you doing calling Joe Biden the left? And when you say that, people are like, oh, no, he's the left because whatever. And then you have some idiot saying things like, yeah, Joe Biden's a communist and China helped him. Venezuela helped him. He's trying to overthrow the governments of China and Venezuela. Really? They helped him? But it is they bastardized people's understanding of ideology and politics to a point where it has become farcical. And now Joe Biden's a socialist. Can I add something else to it that I think is important? This is critical. Go to South America, which I have traveled around it. That's the left. Those people are socialists, Marxists, Leninists. We're socialists. No bones about that, right? Okay, but they're very economically, socially, and many times conservative. A lot of South American countries are very Catholic, not much on abortion. The LGBTQ issue ain't all that hot. See what I mean? So they are, you're going to tell me a socialist ain't the left, but they are culturally a lot of diehard Catholics, and they are culturally conservative. So they are the left, which goes to show the definition of the left is not about cultural issues, because all of a sudden you'd say, well, all of these socialists in Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba, all of these socialists, well, they're conservatives on the right. They're all Trump supporters here because of cultural issues. That just goes to show they are traditional left, and they define their socialism. They define their leftiness based on the fact that they view the world through economic class.
Well said, Garland. Garland, I have one more question for you. And this is a question I've been asking everyone that comes on lately that does a podcast or a radio show or does like independent or investigative journalism. What advice would you give to someone who is thinking about doing what you do, who is thinking about having like their own radio show or having their own YouTube show in left independent media?
A couple of things. Talk about, number one, read a lot. Read various sources. Read all the sources they tell you not to read. Find a lot of alternative media. Find media all over the world to read, right? Yeah, look at the Washington Post or Politico and stuff like that. Look at RT. Look at Press TV. Go to antiwar.com. Go to, find these various places that you can read that are alternative stuff that they tell you not to read. Read all of that so that you could get a very good view of, a broad view of things. Also, focus on issues that you enjoy, that you like, that you find interesting, because then it's not work. If it's work, you're not going to do it for so long. So focus on the things that you're interested in. Read a lot about the things that you're interested in, and also things that you're interested in. Focus on the history. Find out, how did we get here? How did this happen? What are the history of these people? When you're looking at particular countries, look at their culture and their history. Their politics are a result of history and culture. You can understand, if you don't need to know. For instance, I've studied Russia for years. I found it interesting. My mentor for years was, I've told many people, Paul Robeson Jr. He went to school in Russia. He knows the Soviet Union. So I found Russia interesting for years. So I studied it. I studied the history. I studied the culture, and I understand how they think. Take things into account, not just the political thing. One of the things that I talk about when I talk about where Vladimir Putin views the world and the actions he's going to take is this: he's a black belt. If you understand how martial artists think when it comes to conflict, You will understand how he views this conflict, based because martial artists and people who have taken self-defense have a particular view on self-defense and on conflict and how you approach conflict. And you can understand that, and you won't listen to all of this crap about, oh, Putin's just a crazy man, he's going to do this. You'll say, how do martial artists view a conflict? And then you look at what's going on in Ukraine and you're like, interesting, it aligns with that. So don't just look at the factors that everyone else is looking at. Try to find some other angles through some other context through which to view the things that you are looking at, and you'll get some original viewpoints. People want original viewpoints. They don't want everybody on every show saying the same thing. Whatever you do, don't say what everybody else is saying. Don't avoid it. If it's true, it's true, but look for some unique angles. That's what people like, and that's what makes it fun.
Well said. Well said. Garland, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.